In the year 1941, Warsaw, a city occupied by the German forces, was under constant threat. The streets were silent, but the air was thick with fear. Life for the Polish people had become a constant struggle, with death looming at every corner. The city had been divided, the walls built by fear and oppression, and the people lived in constant shadow, knowing that at any moment, the Nazis could decide their fate. Amidst this darkness, one woman stood, determined to make a difference. Eva Novak, a resistance fighter, had been trained to break German codes and gather intelligence for the underground Polish movement. Her mission was to sabotage the German war effort and protect her people. Yet, Eva's task was far from easy. Every action she took carried immense risk, and every step could be her last. But on this particular day, Eva learned of something far more urgent than any code she had broken before. The Germans were planning to send a convoy of trucks to her village, a village filled with innocent lives. Their mission was clear: to exterminate everyone. The villagers had no idea that death was approaching. They went about their daily lives, unaware that their fate hung in the balance. But Eva knew the truth. She had learned about the convoy's arrival through her underground connections. She knew that if she didn't act, the village would be wiped out. There was no room for hesitation. Every second counted. Eva had to make a decision. A decision that would alter the course of her life, and the lives of everyone she loved. The only option was to stop the convoy. But how? Her training as a codebreaker had prepared her for many challenges, but this was different. She could send out a false radio signal, directing the convoy to a wrong location. But there was a problem: if she did this, she would be acting as a traitor to the Germans, a spy in their eyes. If they found out, Eva would be executed on the spot. The weight of this decision pressed down on her. She had to choose between her duty to the resistance and the risk of sacrificing her life for her people. Fear gripped her heart, but so did a sense of duty. She knew she couldn't live with herself if she didn't act. This was her moment. Eva took a deep breath. She sat down in front of the wireless radio, the device that would determine the fate of her village. With trembling hands, she set the dials and sent the false message into the air. The signal was weak, but it was enough to mislead the Germans. The convoy would now be diverted, heading away from the village. Her hands were still shaking when she finished. The signal had been sent, and now all she could do was wait. Wait for the Germans to notice, wait for the consequences of her actions. Would it be enough? Had she just saved her people, or had she signed her own death warrant? The minutes dragged on. Eva stood by the radio, her breath shallow and her heart pounding in her chest. The cold air in the room seemed to freeze time itself. She couldn't move, couldn't think of anything but the radio. The signal had been sent. But would it work? Would the Germans believe the false message? The convoy was still on its way, and every passing second felt like an eternity. Eva's mind raced. She replayed every step in her head, from the moment she decided to send the signal to the moment her hands shook as she pressed the button. It had been so simple, so quick. But the consequences were anything but. The German trucks were still out there. She could hear the engines in her mind, roaring down the road. They were heading straight for her village, and if she had miscalculated even the smallest detail, it would be too late. Eva's legs felt weak. She had never been so afraid in her life. But the fear of failure was nothing compared to the fear of what would happen to her people if she didn't act. She had already made her choice. Now, she could only hope. Hope that the Germans would be fooled. Hope that they would turn away from her village. Hope that her gamble would pay off. As the silence in the room stretched on, Eva's mind flashed back to her training. She had been taught to think fast, to trust her instincts, but no amount of training could prepare her for the weight of this moment. She had done something that could get her killed. Something that could get her entire family executed. Yet, the thought of what might happen to the village if she didn't act made her push aside the fear. She could hear the trucks in her mind, still coming closer. Then, a sound, a distant rumble. The convoy had turned. It had worked. The convoy was going in the wrong direction. Eva felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. She couldn't relax yet. She had saved the village for now, but the danger wasn't over. The Germans would figure it out sooner or later. The thought of the consequences weighed heavily on her, but for a brief moment, Eva allowed herself to feel a small victory. The convoy was lost. The village was safe. For now. As the minutes passed, Eva stood frozen, her eyes never leaving the window. The convoy was still out there. She couldn't afford to look away, not for a single second. Her heart thumped in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. The silence around her felt suffocating. What would happen next? She had taken a massive risk, but it wasn't over. The convoy might have been diverted, but the Germans would surely come searching. They were not easily fooled, and their retaliation would be swift. The thought of what could happen if they found her sent chills down her spine. Her mind raced, thinking of the consequences. If they found her, if they discovered she was the one who sent the false signal, she would be executed immediately. There would be no trial, no mercy. It would be the end. She could already see the soldiers breaking into her home, dragging her out into the street, her hands bound in chains, her fate sealed. The sound of boots on the cold concrete filled her mind, each footstep getting closer and closer. But she couldn't let that happen. She had made a choice, and now she had to live with it. If she didn't act, if she didn't fight, everything she had done so far would be for nothing. The resistance movement, the lives lost, the risks, none of it would matter. Her village would be destroyed, her people killed, and she would have failed them. That thought alone kept her going. She couldn't let them down. She had to stay strong, even if the fear threatened to break her. Then, she heard it. A distant rumble of engines. Her heart skipped a beat. The convoy. It was moving away. The trucks were now going in the wrong direction. The Germans had been fooled, at least for now. But Eva couldn't relax yet. This was only the beginning. She had a small victory, but the battle was far from over. She still had to survive. She still had to keep her village safe. There was no time to waste. Eva's victory was brief. She had diverted the convoy, saved her village for the moment, but the Germans quickly realized something was wrong. They had been misled. The convoy had been directed away, but the mistake didn't go unnoticed. The Germans didn't take kindly to failure. They would retaliate. Eva knew it was only a matter of time before the repercussions of her actions would come crashing down. The sound of the engines in her mind was replaced by a more ominous one, the sound of soldiers marching through the streets, searching for someone. Searching for her. The resistance had done everything they could to keep her hidden, but there was no real place for her to run anymore. Her location would eventually be discovered. Every breath she took, every movement she made could lead the enemy to her doorstep. She couldn't keep hiding forever. She had saved the village, but now she had to face the cost. A cost far heavier than she had anticipated. The Germans would find her. She was a traitor in their eyes. They would come for her, and when they did, they wouldn't be gentle. They would make sure she paid for every second of defiance. Eva had saved many lives with that one decision, but now, she had to pay the price. There was no way out. All she could do was wait for them to find her. The sound of boots echoed through her mind, getting closer with every passing minute. The fear tightened around her chest. But as she sat in her hiding place, there was no turning back. Her decision was made. The fate of her village had been sealed, and now she had to face the consequences. Days passed, and the silence around Eva felt heavier with each one. She could hear nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat, thumping in her chest like a drum. The Germans were searching everywhere. They had been combing the streets, knocking on doors, asking questions. Every knock on a door was a reminder that they were getting closer to finding her. Every shadow, every passing figure in the street made her heart race. But Eva stayed hidden, moving only when necessary, speaking only in whispers. The fear of being discovered was constant, gnawing at her every moment. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as Eva sat huddled in a dark corner of her hiding place, a figure appeared in the doorway. At first, she thought it was one of the soldiers. Her heart stopped in her chest. But then, the figure stepped forward, and Eva saw that it was someone from the resistance. A familiar face. She was not alone. The resistance had found her. They had not forgotten her. The feeling of relief that washed over her was overwhelming. But the danger was far from over. The Germans would not give up. The resistance would not have enough time to hide her forever. Eva knew that her time was running out. She couldn't hide in the shadows for much longer. Soon, she would have to make another choice. She had saved her village, but the consequences were still hanging over her. The Germans would find her, and when they did, they would make her pay. Her mind raced as she thought of what could happen next. But for now, the only thing that mattered was that the resistance had come. They had not abandoned her. As the figure from the resistance stepped into the dim light, Eva's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him instantly, one of the operatives who had helped her in the past. His face was grim, his expression taut with worry. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow. She knew there was no time for questions. The soldiers were getting closer, and the longer she stayed in one place, the more dangerous it became. The resistance member led her through a series of hidden alleyways, each one darker than the last. The streets of Warsaw were a maze, but they knew them well. Eva moved quickly, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. The sounds of the city faded behind her, replaced by the rhythmic sound of her boots on the cobblestones. The fear of being caught lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. But she kept moving. She had no choice. They eventually reached a safe house, a place where members of the resistance could hide when they were being hunted. Eva stepped inside, grateful for the brief respite. The walls were lined with maps, photographs, and papers, evidence of the underground movement that was fighting to protect the people of Poland. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing mind. She was safe for now, but the danger was far from over. The Germans would not stop looking for her, and the longer she stayed in hiding, the more risks she took. But for the first time in days, Eva allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had made it this far. She had saved the village. But now, she had to think about what came next. The resistance had offered her a place to stay, but there was always the looming threat of discovery. She couldn't hide forever. She knew she would have to make another difficult decision soon. The stakes were higher now. It wasn't just her life at risk anymore. It was the lives of everyone she cared about. The safe house was a quiet place, tucked away from the chaos of the streets. Inside, the resistance members gathered, speaking in hushed tones, their faces marked by the hardships of war. Eva felt out of place among them. She had always been a solitary figure, focused on her mission and the task at hand. But now, in this room full of strangers, she felt the weight of the war pressing down on her. These were the people who had been fighting for freedom, risking their lives every day to stop the German machine. And now, Eva was part of that fight, whether she wanted to be or not. She was no longer just a codebreaker. She was a soldier in her own right. But even as she stood among them, Eva couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. She had sent the Germans off course, saved her village, but at what cost? Her life, her family's safety, and the lives of everyone she cared about were now in jeopardy. The Germans would stop at nothing to find her. Every day, every moment she spent in hiding felt like a countdown to her inevitable capture. She had no illusions about what would happen if they found her. It would be swift. It would be brutal. And it would be final. Eva's mind raced as she thought of the future. Could she continue to fight in the shadows? Or was her presence a danger to everyone around her? The resistance members had already taken great risks to hide her, but they couldn't protect her forever. They had their own battles to fight, their own missions to complete. And with every passing day, the risk of discovery grew. Eva couldn't stay hidden for much longer. She had to find a way to keep fighting, to contribute to the cause. The war was far from over, and she couldn't sit idly by. There was a fire inside her, a desire to do more, to help her people, to make the ultimate sacrifice if necessary. She had already risked everything for her village. Now, she had to risk everything for the greater good. Eva's decision to hide in the safe house wasn't the end of her journey, it was just another chapter in the war she had been forced into. The next morning, as she sat with the resistance members, one of them, an older man with a scarred face, approached her. His name was Adam, and he had been part of the underground movement long before she had. With a calm but serious voice, he spoke. "You saved your village, Eva. But the price of that action is steep. You're a marked woman now. The Germans will not rest until they have you." He paused for a moment, his eyes meeting hers. "You have to understand, this was no ordinary mistake you made. The Germans are ruthless. When they find you, there will be no mercy." The weight of his words hit Eva harder than she expected. She had known the risks, of course, but hearing it from someone who had seen the brutality firsthand made it all too real. Adam wasn't just warning her about the Germans, he was preparing her for what was to come. There was no escape from the consequences of her actions. But then Adam's tone shifted. "However," he continued, "you've done something important. You've shown that we are capable of turning the tide. That's why we're going to use you, Eva. We need someone like you, someone who can outsmart the Germans. We need you to work with us." Eva's heart skipped a beat. "Work with you," she repeated, not sure if she had heard correctly. Adam nodded. "Yes. You've already proven yourself. You're more than just a codebreaker now. You're a fighter. And we need people like you in this war. We need your skills to undermine the Germans at every turn. But to do that, you need to come out of hiding. You can't stay here forever." Eva's mind raced. She had just come to terms with the fact that she might not make it out of this war alive. But now, Adam was offering her a chance to keep fighting. To be part of something bigger than herself. It was a choice that both terrified and exhilarated her. She looked around the room at the faces of the other resistance members. They had all chosen to risk their lives for something greater than themselves. It was their courage, their sacrifice, that had kept the fight alive. Eva knew what she had to do. She couldn't hide anymore. She had already given so much. Now, it was time to fight for everything that mattered. It was time to step out of the shadows. Eva's resolve hardened as the days passed. She had made the decision to fight, to no longer hide in the shadows. But stepping back into the world she had once known meant stepping into even greater danger. The Germans were relentless in their pursuit, and they were getting closer. Eva's fear of capture was constant, a shadow that clung to her every move. But it was not just fear that pushed her forward, it was the belief that every action, no matter how small, could make a difference. The resistance had its eyes on a new target, an important German communications hub that needed to be sabotaged. This would be Eva's first mission since she made the decision to step back into the fight. It was a risky operation, one that would require stealth, precision, and above all, courage. Eva knew she had no choice but to succeed. There was no room for failure. She had seen what the Germans did to those who failed them. She wasn't about to end up like the others. The operation was simple in theory: break into the communications building, plant explosives, and get out before the Germans could respond. But nothing in this war was ever simple. Eva's mind raced as she prepared for the mission, mentally rehearsing every step she would take. Her hands were steady now, no longer trembling. She had learned to control her fear. As night fell, Eva and a small group of resistance fighters set out for the target. The city of Warsaw lay silent, the streets empty, as if the whole city was holding its breath. Every corner, every alley could be a trap, but Eva's eyes were sharp. She had learned how to stay hidden, how to move without being seen. It was a skill that had saved her life more than once. As they approached the building, the sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet night. Eva's heart skipped a beat, but she held her ground. The Germans weren't far behind. They were close, but so was her objective. She had one chance to make it work. One chance to strike. The plan was in motion. The resistance members moved swiftly, setting the charges. Eva watched from a distance, her breath coming in quick bursts. The tension was unbearable, the quiet only broken by the sound of her own heartbeat. Then, the moment came. The explosives went off, sending a deafening roar into the night. The building shook, the windows shattered, and the night was lit up by the flash of the explosion. It was done. The Germans would know soon enough. Eva's group quickly scattered, disappearing into the night, blending into the shadows. The mission was a success. But there was no time to celebrate. The danger was far from over. As Eva moved through the streets, her thoughts were focused on the next step, the next mission. There was no rest in this war. The enemy would always be lurking, always be watching. But for now, Eva had given the Germans one more defeat. She had made a difference, and that was enough. The blast of the explosion echoed through the streets, shattering the silence of the night. For a brief moment, there was nothing but the ringing in Eva's ears. Then, reality came crashing back. The mission was successful, but it was only the beginning. The Germans would respond, and they would come looking for those responsible. Eva's pulse quickened as she moved through the darkened streets, her mind racing. She had done what was needed, but the cost was still to come. There would be no escaping the aftermath. Her actions had set a chain of events into motion that could not be undone. Eva knew the Germans would not stop until they found every last member of the resistance. And now, her face was on the list. Every shadow, every movement in the streets, every siren in the distance reminded her of the danger she was in. The thought of what the Germans would do if they caught her was always at the back of her mind. They would not show mercy. But Eva pushed the fear aside. She had chosen this path, and now she would follow it to the end. The resistance had given her a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. She was no longer just a codebreaker, she was a soldier. And soldiers didn't run. As she moved through the streets, Eva's resolve grew stronger. She had already risked everything. The mission had been a success, but now there was more to be done. The Germans had suffered a loss, but they would retaliate. They always did. Eva knew that the only way to survive was to keep moving, keep fighting. The resistance needed her, and she wouldn't let them down. She had already defied the Germans once. She had saved her village and brought the fight to their doorstep. Now, she had to keep pushing, keep fighting until the very end. Her legs ached from the run, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. There was no time to rest. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. As she turned another corner, Eva knew that her journey was far from over. The war was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that one day, they would win. Hope that her sacrifices would mean something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. Days turned into weeks, and the war showed no signs of slowing down. The Germans intensified their efforts, searching every corner of the city, leaving no stone unturned. Eva had learned to move like a ghost through the streets, always staying in the shadows, always one step ahead. But even as she hid, she knew that it was only a matter of time before the walls closed in on her. The resistance had done all they could to protect her, but there was no way to hide forever. The pressure mounted, and Eva's mind began to fray at the edges. The fear, the constant threat of discovery, was taking its toll. She had lost count of how many times she had looked over her shoulder, certain that a German soldier was right behind her. But there was no time to rest. There was too much to be done. The Germans were relentless, and every day that passed brought more suffering to the Polish people. Eva had seen firsthand what the Nazis were capable of. She had witnessed their cruelty, their inhumanity, and it had only fueled her determination to keep fighting. She had made a promise to herself that she would never give up, that she would never stop fighting until the Germans were defeated. But now, as the days stretched on, Eva began to wonder if that promise was realistic. Could she keep fighting? Could she keep running, keep hiding, keep risking her life for a cause that felt like it was slipping further away with every passing day? The war had taken so much from her. She had lost her family, her friends, and her home. She had sacrificed everything for the cause, and yet, the Germans still seemed unstoppable. One night, as Eva sat alone in the safe house, her thoughts spiraled. She wondered if there would ever be an end to the fighting. Would there be a day when the war was over, when the suffering stopped, when the world was at peace? Or was this all in vain? Was she just one small part of an endless, grinding machine that would never stop turning? But then, she thought about the village she had saved, the lives she had protected. The faces of the people she had helped flashed through her mind. And suddenly, she knew what she had to do. The fight wasn't over. It couldn't be. If she stopped now, everything she had done would have been for nothing. She had to keep going. The next morning, Eva packed her things, ready to take on whatever came next. She had made a decision. She would fight until the very end. The Germans had brought war to her doorstep, but she wouldn't let them win. Not while there was still hope, not while there was still a chance to make a difference. Eva's resolve was ironclad as she set out once more, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. The days of hiding, of waiting, were over. The Germans had invaded her country, but they would not conquer her spirit. They would not break her will to fight. She had seen what they were capable of, how they could destroy families, communities, and entire nations. But she had also seen the strength of the resistance, the courage of ordinary people willing to stand up against the most powerful military in the world. As Eva walked through the streets of Warsaw, she knew that she was no longer just one woman fighting for survival. She was part of something much bigger. She was part of a movement that refused to be silenced, no matter the cost. The Germans could take everything from her, her home, her family, her future, but they could not take away her will to fight. The war was not over, but Eva now had something she had lost for so long: hope. Hope for a better future, hope for a free Poland, hope that one day, her actions would be remembered, not as those of a traitor, but as those of a hero who did what was necessary to save her people. The fight was far from over, and there would be many more sacrifices along the way. But Eva had found peace with her decisions. She had done what she could to save her village, to protect her people, to fight back against the tyranny of the Germans. And as she looked out over the horizon, the sun setting on the war-torn city of Warsaw, she knew that one day, the resistance would succeed. One day, the Germans would be defeated, and peace would return to her country. Until that day came, Eva would keep fighting. Because no matter how dark the night, she believed that the dawn would eventually break. Ultra-bright high-exposure black and white World War II documentary silver gelatin photograph. Strict grayscale. One emotional moment from this segment: Eva, standing tall in the street, looking out over the horizon with a determined look on her face, her posture strong and resolute. Soft shadows, crisp detail, visible pores, natural skin texture, 35 to 50 mm lens, 3/4 angle, no text.